Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here every Friday night, except for, well, maybe a couple here and there. I have been doing this show for over half a decade, and I love all the people that I've met, minus maybe a couple, but I think that this is such a great platform. I appreciate the fact that all of you are listening from all over the world. You support the show, and you always, when you get into chat, you offer very respectful and nice comments, constructive comments. And I think that's something that we definitely need in this subject. Of course, I've been busy over the past week doing my archives with Anne Druffel and getting things ready to post online on her mother's website, on Anne's website, thanks to Alice Druffel. I have not spoken with Gordon Lohr. He is still, from my understanding, doing okay. But again, please send your prayers and blessings to Gordon Lohr, who is a dear friend of mine and who was in NICAP way back when. I want to give a big thanks to my biggest show supporter, Mario, who is here every week and has helped me through a lot of things as I progressed in this subject. He is wonderful. And I also want to thank people that donate to the show. You can go to patreon.com to pledge your support, $5, $10, whatever you can do. That goes to help archiving and keeping the show on the air, and I do appreciate it. So thank you very much. I am here tonight with someone that I've known for quite some time, and we've had over the years some very interesting exchanges. We've kind of gone from a relationship when we had the Roswell Slides debacle going on, which we will talk about. We went through all of those things, and that was a very interesting experience for me, getting into the field and making mistakes, seeing how people react. And so it's been something. But over the years, I have read all of Curt's blogs. I really have come to respect what he has done. And I am glad that he is appearing on the show tonight. This is the second time, but we're going to pretend like it's the first because the last show he was on, we were doing a podcast, and now this is video. So it's really fun to see Curt tonight. He is the author behind, Curt Collins is the author behind Blue Blurry Lines, which you can go to. It's a website. It's a website focused on UFO mystery, legends, and hoaxes. And after a career in retail management, Curt began writing about UFOs, and he paid special attention to the Cash Landrum case. And he spent years and years reinvestigating all of this, and that is a fascinating case for many, many reasons. In 2015, he began on an investigative team, the Roswell Slides Research Group, that exposed the BeWitness alien photo fiasco. More recently, he's launched The Saucers That Time Forgot with Claude Falkstrom, focusing on unearthing tales of UFO history that UFO history is overlooked or would rather forget. Curt lives in the southern United States near Jackson, Mississippi. And so, Curt, first of all, I just want to say that I'm super stoked to have you here.
Well, thank you. And this is the video experience is new to me, so bear with me.
No. I love it. I think for me, as much as I love doing the podcast, like I love seeing people's faces and seeing people's reactions. And sometimes you can, I guess on a computer, like hide behind typing things, but then when you actually see somebody, you have more of a connection to them. And I think that's a really cool thing. So thank you. So what have you been up to? What's going on in your world?
Oh, well, so much of it is indoors these days, but I'm kind of a keyboard guy, so that's sort of how I sort of connected to the UFO world, or reconnected. I was interested in my youth, and a weird thing. Speaking of computers and UFOs, I thought about this a while back. The very first UFO related search on the internet I did was when I was a member of AOL.com, and the news about the Heaven's Gate broke, and you couldn't find anything about it. The news carried just some short amount, and I was fascinated with this tragic story and wanted to know more. And so I stayed up all night long trying to refresh, and I didn't know how to search the internet or anything at that time. So that was just kind of a weird I didn't connect that for many years, and I happened to think, oh yeah, that's, that wasn't really how I got started, but that was kind of an interim. It was really about 2011 when I became interested in UFOs as an adult. I'd kind of given up about the time I was 20. Just disappointed with some of the things I saw. Particularly, there was this one awful movie called Hangar 18, and it was advertised as if it was a documentary, and it was going to be the shocking truth behind this UFO crash. And it was awful. It was like a TV movie, and I thought it was really wooden, and it was sort of like Watergate mixed with the Aztec hoax story, and it was just rubbery, and it's terrible.
That sounds frightening on multiple levels.
Yeah. Oh, and so more importantly, my mom was somewhat interested in UFOs. I took her to the movie, and I was so embarrassed. It's like, oh, I'm sorry I subjected you to this. So maybe that movie wasn't what did it, but that was about the time I faded away. So, and came back into it. And first, interesting to me, I saw this documentary on Gray Barker on Netflix. It was called Shades of Gray, and it had several UFO personalities in it. Jim Moseley, who I later connected with, Rick Hilberg, who I've also connected with, Stan Friedman was in it, and Jerry Clark, the author of the UFO Encyclopedia. And I briefly, had discussions or emails with each of them. And I was fascinated with Gray Barker because he was sort of the movie sort of described him as a whiskey preacher. He didn't necessarily believe, but he kept kind of preaching the UFO story. And I was just so fascinated with how, at least at some point, he was doing some genuine UFO work. And then he was also promoting some hoaxes. And that was kind of a conundrum and a mystery that I wanted to pursue.
And so when you started pursuing that mystery, what were some of the conclusions that you came to?
Oh, well, that was a long time coming. I wanted to see, what was he looking into? What did Gray Barker, what was he like? The people that knew him. And I eventually got a hold of Jim Moseley, who was, he did Saucer News back around 1954. He passed away in 2012, and for all that time, he had UFO conferences, published one or two books, newsletters, and he was just heavily involved in the UFO culture. And he knew, virtually everyone. And, we had long phone conversations. And one of the things he told me was that, he wanted to know why I was interested. And he spent a lot of time talking to me. And he said, well, a lot of this is BS, but he was genuinely interested in the parts that weren't. But, and he enjoyed kind of poking fun at some of the stuffed shirts, whether they were skeptics or UFO proponents who maybe took themselves a little too seriously. And he always had a sort of sense of humor about things, even if he did have a genuine interest.
And so what were some of his favorite people to poke fun at?
Well, Stanton Friedman was a frequent rival. And he was actually friends with Phil Klass, but of course, he was a noted skeptic, and he was as rigid in his position in his own way as Stanton Friedman was. In his earlier days, Donald Kehoe of NICAPs, because he had this really rigid position. He wanted everyone to believe in flying saucers, but he didn't want to believe anyone to talk about meeting the people in them. And so the people who, and Gray Barker he promoted a lot of the contactee type, the people who'd said they'd gone on rides with people in flying saucers, and published some books about that. And now Jim didn't really go for all that, but he just thought that the position that NICAP had was so extreme that it was ridiculous and worth poking fun at. So.
Well, and it's really interesting. And even, I know that you've done blogs on Kehoe. and talking a little bit about him over the years, and also, the connection to Charles Lindbergh, which I find fascinating. And so give us a little more information on Donald Kehoe and his association with Charles Lindbergh.
Well, I don't know that much about it, except that he was Lindbergh's biographer. You may have more on that than I do, but so he was a writer that he wrote nonfiction and pulp fiction, which aviator stories that border on what we consider superhero stories today. I mean, they're fantastic adventures of a top-notch pilot who was larger than life and often fought Nazis or someone else in super weapons, which were almost UFOs. They were super technological devices that no one had ever seen before, with great performance. Of course, the good guy always managed to outfight them. But he also wrote on straight aviation matters and wrote for True Magazine, and he got this assignment, which I don't have the text memorized, but I forgot his name. Purdy was the last name of the editor. He sent him a telegram saying that he wanted him to investigate the UFO story, that he thought that there was he didn't use the word cover up. Maybe it was a secret. He thought that it behind the UFO story was maybe, some secret by the government. And I think that Kehoe began pursuing it in that angle. And that would have been in probably the summer of 1949. And through the people and so Kehoe was in World War I believe. He was a Marine. That's how he became a major. He was not involved in war. Well, if he was involved in War II, it wasn't military action. I'm not sure what he did, but it wasn't military action. But he had a lot of connections. Some of the people he'd gone with at Annapolis were had prominent military connections. So he used those connections to pry into the UFO story. And some of the people he talked to in the military favored this extraterrestrial conclusion. And he went whole hog on that as the answer to flying saucers. And so in the title of his magazine article in True, which was released at the end of December 1949, which was cover dated January 1950, was "The Flying Saucers Are Real." And months later, he I don't know how much of the actual text he used, but the idea and the concepts, he expanded that into a paperback book. And it was the first real book on flying saucers. And there was there's some trivia associated with that, but to stick purely with Donald Kehoe, but he had military sources that supported the ideas that he had. Some people criticized his writing because he sort of recounted the information in dramatic scenes with dialogue that probably was half created. So, there was some dramatic element to it. Now critics, including the later head of Project Blue Book, Captain Edward Ruppelt, he said of Kehoe that the material that he based his writing on was solid. However, the conclusions Kehoe reached were not necessarily so. So, but there was something there at the root of it. So, whereas some people just make everything up. So, Kehoe was not one of those.
He was an interesting fellow, and I think that's been one of the cool things for me to be friends with Gordon Lohr and to, talk with him and interview him and things, because he worked with Kehoe, and just to, learn some of the things that he was, he was a very racist individual, which I think is quite interesting. And I know that John Keel and Lynn Cato there have been some mentions of that in their exchanges and things, but what a fascinating man, and very, anti-commie and things. And so it's interesting to look, as when you go back through the history of things and then see how political and religious agendas play into the UFO narrative. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, okay. One thing, I was just looking at something about Lynn Cato. So, and I have seen her mention that she she did the bibliography of UFO work for the Condon Committee, and and so I understand that she was an African American lady. I don't really know much about her, but so you say that she had a run-in with Kehoe?
Yes, yes, I am. So, and I think that was mentioned, and I will find the specific exchange. I think it was a letter between her and Keel where she spoke about that, but I'll find that and I will forward that to you. It's very interesting.
Well, that is interesting. Now I've just looking at the UFO, the periodicals and everything, and the magazine articles and everything. She did an incredible job of putting that list together. So, I think that she needs more recognition for that.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the unsung women and African Americans in UFO history.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's like, you look at, there's so many new people coming into the subject and they don't learn the history and look at the people that have made sacrifices, like dedicated their whole lives and lost family members, lost their careers, all of these things so they could preserve history and investigate the subject. And it's like right now we're kind of seeing, in my opinion, the rewriting of the UFO history, which I think is sad because we need to look at that. There's so much there. So many interactions with different people, and it's much greater than just looking for UFOs. There's a lot at play here. What do you think about, like, especially, let me just ask you this, and not to get too much off track, but so you've got the 2017, you've got the New York Times article that came out, and then all of a sudden you've got all of these new people popping out of the woodwork that are looking into UFOs, and they're looking at it from, the specific date where you've got the Tic Tacs and this type of thing from that point forward, but yet they're not necessarily looking back and doing a deep dive into the historical aspect of things, which could really teach us all some of the patterns that players use in the subject to put out disinformation and lead people astray, in my opinion.
Oh, well, I agree. And the 2017 is an interesting benchmark, but there are new people. Well, the new people being born all the time, and a lot of them eventually become interested in UFOs. But we rarely have a single event and it penetrates the news like that one did. And that made a lot of people interested at once. And there are repercussions, there's television shows and specials and things that keep keying off of that. And they continue to be interested. And it did help add some legitimacy to the topic, but it's brought in a lot of newcomers, like you say, who don't necessarily have the knowledge or experience. And part of that is on them. Everybody has a period at which they learn. Some of these people rush to the blogs or microphones before they really knew what they're talking about. And the thing that gripes me about this is that there is a lot of UFO garbage that has been taken out with the trash. There have been cases that have proven to be false. There have been things that became IFOs. They're identified, they're put to rest. And some of these new people are coming across old articles, sometimes newspaper stories. They see the newspaper story, but they don't see the later retraction or correction, which always appears on page 14 and not page 1, that explains what something is. So some of the things there's documents in FBI files on the Aztec UFO hoax. That it's called the Guy Hotel memo. And that resurfaces probably every, 14 months in ufology as, hey, this is proof of the UFO crash at Roswell. Well, all it is an agent recording the record of the hoax. But there's constantly someone seeing it on a website and recycling. And that's just one bothersome example of very many like it. And so my recommendation is, one, read a good UFO comprehensive history. And everybody can do that. And then secondly, find an old timer and ask them about that before you spread all this stuff over the internet. Do some vetting to the material. I'd be glad to help. Erica would help. Let's see, I help administrate a UFO Facebook group, UFO updates. We like to answer questions like that there. So before you embarrass yourself, we'll help. And if it's something valid, we'll help you find supporting data. And, we're not going to steal it from you.
Okay, let me just, let me show this really quick. Okay. And speaking of, I just had to show this because we need to go here. I mean, here I am. And yes, this was quite some time ago. I was the lovely host for a brief moment I think I hosted 3 shows for MUFON Radio. And this was back when I was state director for MUFON, and I was so gung-ho. And Steve Hudgens, who was one of the heads of MUFON, said to me, well, kid, do you want to take this? Do you want to interview Musan? And I'm just like, okay, I guess that would be great. And this was back when the Roswell slides came into the public domain. And I knew at that point in time, because there was such contention with both sides, Curt, you were on one side, and Greg Bishop and several people in the Roswell Slides Research Group. And then, I'm here trying to do my best to interview and present both sides. And I was very wet behind the ears. And so there was, I got a lot of blowback because I did that interview, which I wish it was still available online. I wish somebody had it, because even in that position, I feel like I was really trying to do my best to promote both sides. But since that happened, I definitely learned that there were, obviously, you cannot trust what you hear. And when somebody presents you with a packet of information that is saying, here is my scientific research, and this is what I have done, and these are the people that are promoting me, well, you can't take things at face value. And I definitely learned that lesson with the Roswell slides. And so, Curt, talk about the Roswell slides, and then talk about the way you viewed me in all of that, because I think this is really fascinating, and I think it might help younger people that are getting into this understand some of the pitfalls that people go through.
Well, let's see. So that was we've had some ups and downs. Now, during that time, we were talking quite a bit. I gave you some information, and you invited me to be on that show, and I declined. I was mic shy, still kind of am. So let's see, hard to know where to begin. So there had been a lot of UFO buzz, particularly at the website of Rich Reynolds, and Anthony Bragalia was the main source of information, saying that there was pictures of the alien body recovered at Roswell. And there was, the information was just kind of dripping out over time. And, some people, Kevin Randall was supposedly involved at one time. Tom Carey and Don Schmidt were the primary researchers. And it was much that was going on, I think, as 2014 for sure, maybe as early as 2013, maybe late 2013. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, it really started coming to a head in 2014. There was an announcement. It was sort of an announcement of an announcement. And in February, there was going to be an announcement of where there was a presentation to the public, and the pictures would be revealed. So some of the people, mostly people I'd met at the UFO Updates group, we started talking about things and said, well, this is seeming to get serious. And can we verify this? Can we prove or disprove it? And when the date was announced, it was going to be, it was Cinco de Mayo. May the 5th was when there was going to be this big event. And it turned out it was produced by Jaime Maussan, who was pretty much regarded, well, not universally, but many people regard him as a poor source of information. A lot of material, faked pictures and videos, and just not very credible. And he had some previous cryptid creature, I think, that was proven to be, constructed, and there are other problems, just lots of problems. However, he's probably Mexico's leading ufologist. I mean, he does a show. He's best known. He has a following in the United States. He's invited to conferences, including the one for MUFON that year. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So we put together a group. There was when they did the preview for it, there was a split-second shot of the alien body. It was, although it was shown at an angle. Well, some sleuths in our group and otherwise isolated that frame and kind of restored it to shape. And it was an imperfect image, but you could see that it looked weird, and it looked like it might have been a mummified child. And we began investigating that possibility. As it went on, we said, well, we need to find some people that are familiar with biology, photography techniques. And so we brought in some other people, through not just strangers, but, everyone had a friend that knew something. And so we kind of fortified the group with some scientific chops and began investigating. Okay, well, I'm kind of stuck here. So where do you want to go from there?
Sorry, I was just trying to find a slide of the mummy. But so you bring in this group of people, and then you start the placard. I mean, you start looking at the placard, and there was a group of people and who was involved with that, with kind of deciphering everything.
Okay, that was just where the placard came in when they finally had the big show and everybody came out, and it was a huge production in Mexico, and you had to buy a streaming ticket to watch it, and most of the group watched it, and there were also some pirated sites that showed it, which is about how I saw it, because I didn't want to give these promoters any money, so maybe I'm ashamed of that now. But anyway, the one of the things that was finally shown was a better shot of it that included the strangest thing is, if this was an alien body, why was it in what looked like a glass display case? Mm-hmm. And in one of the pictures, there was clearly a handwritten sign. Well, the thing was the shots weren't taken from a camera with a tripod. It was handheld, and it shook. Well, there was when we got a good picture of the placard after the show was over. So this would have been around May 7th, somewhere in there. Nablator, who is a French researcher, and he uses a pseudonym. Some people choose to. They don't want their careers interfered with their UFO research. He and other people, he was the primary one. He uses a program called Smart to Blur, and it can take a photograph. And if there is a blur, a motion blur, if it's out of focus or too distant, it's not going to help with that. But if your hand shakes, it can take the blur out of that by some kind of, I don't know, it's not magic, but I don't know if it's AI either. And he worked with that, and he brought it into focus, and he didn't get it right the first time. He had to keep adjusting it, but he was basically getting 2 or 3 words at a time, because it was so weird that it looked like in cursive, either not cursive writing, almost looked like Arabic writing, until you got it into focus where it was proper. And it said mummified body, 2-year-old boy. It was a Native American child from I've gone blank on the name, but anyway, they lived on a cliff. He probably fell to his death at the age of 2, and it was naturally mummified by the climate. And unfortunately, human remains of Native Americans weren't given much respect. They were stuck in museums as basically attractions, and that's what had happened to this child. And it was photographed by a tourist. It wound up in the hands of someone who said, "Hey, this looks like an alien," and they brought it to the ufologists, and that's how the train wreck started.
And that is really unfortunate. I know that around here in Utah, we have been building tracks and things, and there have been rumors that through with us building and creating this railway system, that we've uncovered Native American remains, quite substantial, uh, substantial remains from different people, and that we have, of course, that you don't see that on the news because everybody here in Utah is going to brush that under the carpet, but that is really unfortunate that those things happen, and people are being exploited in that regard. That's never good.
Yeah, it's well, this is kind of goes off on a tangent, but this isn't the first time that images of a deceased person have been exploited for ufology. There have been some things like some deformed children. There was this photograph called the Tomato Man, which was supposed to be of a crash document of a UFO. Well, it was a picture of a dead Air Force pilot. And you could even, if you examine the photograph, you can even see his glasses in the picture. And there's been several things like that. It's distasteful. And another one is there have been these Nazca mummies, which are piecework of human bones and other things and they have supposedly elongated fingers, and they've desecrated graves and the bodies in order to produce these things. It's pretty sickening.
Well, and I remember a few years back, there was a couple people, one specifically who's high up in MUFON, that traveled to different countries and apparently illegally smuggled out some body parts of remains and things, and yet nobody seems to be looking at that and asking questions about it. And I mean, this is one of the reasons, to me, the field as a whole is so unethical, and why we need to start, if we were in any other profession on the planet, there would be, there would be some boundaries. There would be, we would not be allowing this type of thing. So that's unfortunate. And thank you for bringing that up. And so can you tell us more about the Tomato Man?
No, I don't have the details of that on hand, but I did think a couple of other atrocities. So there's the Star Child skull, which is just a deformed child.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the thing Stephen Greer with
Atacama?
Yeah. So that's another, and they're proven by Gary Nolan to be, just human DNA. It's just a deformed embryo, basically. So, these are also examples of something touted as alien. The human body is in states of decay or preservation, looks pretty weird, and this has been misrepresented. Animal parts, and they used to make these Fiji mermaids out of half monkeys and half fish and sew them together. It reminds me of that. It's awful, and it's look for better evidence, and don't rob graves to do it. Whatever you're, that's awful.
I know. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's really important. And I think that there's so many things that people don't realize have taken place. And that's why history is really important with this subject, because you get sold a bill of goods. And now with the internet and social media, it's like, it's you're seeing things and you're being presented things, the same old stuff. Like you mentioned, Curt. It's just like, and here you've got MJ12 again. And here you've got, yet Serpo and all of these things. And you just think, okay, this is really special. And we really haven't made any advancements, but.
I'm all for re-examining classic cases, but the valid ones, not the circus stories. And, weird thing about it, most genuine UFO cases are, they're like talking to someone who, saw a crime. Guy grabbed a person, he ran off. It's something, you see something, it flies away. It's, you may get a good look at it, but you don't usually get a good long look at it. And these stories where I saw something consistently for 4 weeks, and I received messages telepathically, and things like that. They're too elaborate the real encounters are usually brief and confusing, and some of them don't indicate an alien spacecraft. They could well be anything from a unknown aircraft, some kind of energy field unknown to science. We have to keep an open mind, and look for new ideas. And but there are certain portions that really need it. I call them, like, they remind me of the Dracula from the B movies. They keep rising from the grave.
They do, and it's funny because I talked to, like Barry Greenwood and Jan Aldrich and stuff, and it's just like, seriously? Or some of the older researchers that have become, very important to me, that mentor me and things, and it's just like I mean, there's a reason that all of those people kind of move out of the public spotlight in the field, because it's like, this old crap again. And at what point is anybody going to learn? And okay, you guys don't care about history. Good luck to you. And that's just, it's crazy. And then you've get, like now with some of the belief systems that are some of the ways that we're using politics to move into the UFO thing. And then you've got the David Ikes of the world and the Corey Goods and all of these people that are really completely whacked out. And it's a really curious topic in that regard. I mean, what are your takes on Corey Good, just off the top of your head?
I've paid very little attention to Corey Good and the other storytellers along those lines, because there's nothing to verify. I mean, there's nothing to examine. All you've got is his story, and it's a big story. I mean, it's a science fiction epic, and that's something, though, we have to kind of stop and examine. I mean, most people, myself included, got involved in or became interested through either media coverage one way or another, whether it was a UFO special on TV or the topic of UFO and aliens in entertainment. There's a movie or television show. I saw The Invaders as a kid and was fascinated. Watched shows like Twilight Zone and Outer Limit, in its later days. And, that was my initial hook. And, it was years later where I really was trying to find some substantial information about it. But there are some people that I think they have an interest in UFOs that's similar to wrestling fans following pro wrestling. It's entertainment to them, and they want this big drama and everything. And I guess they can have their entertainment, but it shouldn't get in the way of genuine research. It's just very difficult for the two to coexist.
Absolutely. And I think it's funny because when I started really digging into this and looking at some of the people in the subject that were at the top of the heap, I mean, some of the people that are making the rounds on the UFO circuit and things like that, it's like they would present their biographies. And, oh, yes, I was in the military. I did this for the DOD, or I had blah, yada, yada. And then when you actually looked into their backgrounds, they were so completely full of garbage that it was just like, what? And you could, bring that out time and time again. And yet, here we are now and seeing some of the same people that are out there promoting this, different things. And it's like, my gosh, I thoroughly went through, as did Phil Leach and a few other people that I've had on my show over the years. We've gone out there and laid everything out about somebody's involvement in the military or the DOD. And it's like, why don't people want to look at this? Or even like some of the people that have been involved in pedophilia that have made the rounds in the UFO world. I mean, talk a little bit about that and some of the really scummy characters who've been idolized in ufology.
Oh boy. Well, there are a lot of them. It's I don't ufology is so disorganized, and so much of it is an entertainment medium, and it's like friends and show business. And it seems like, I don't know what sort of crime you have to commit, or fraud or disgrace, for you to be kicked out. Now, there have been people that, okay, so Don Schmidt, who promoted the Roswell Slides, he is one of many, many people in ufology that have inflated their resume. So he was bragging about his educational background and that he was working as I don't know, an artist or whatever he was doing. Well, at the time, he was basically a mailman, and there's no shame in that, but he wanted greater status than that. He misrepresented his academic background and qualifications. He was disgraced for a while. I think it broke up his partnership with Kevin Randall for a while. They've since renewed their friendship, but it did not permanently damage his career. There have been back in the old days, George Adamski, the most famous contactee and the one who basically was the model for all the others, he was known as Professor Adamski. Well, it turned out that the professor part was a nickname that his followers gave him because he gave lectures and he had no academic background. Now, he had served honorably in World War I. He was actually probably, I don't know if he was ever an ordained minister, but he essentially was a minister of a religious sect or maybe even cult. And one of his followers, George Hunt Williamson, also misrepresented himself as doctor and claimed to have a degree in archaeology. And so there's a couple of examples of probably dozens, maybe hundreds. It sounds better when you're giving a lecture or selling a book, pitching to an audience to have some kind of credential. And I will say, on one hand, there was a person that was often identified as Dr. Stanton Friedman, but Stanton was quick to correct and say he was a physicist, and he did not have a doctorate. So he was very forthcoming about that.
And so let's talk about George Hunt Williamson, because I mean, what an interesting figure in all of this. What are your thoughts? Can you give the audience a little information about him?
Sure. Now, I'm not an expert on it, but so we can sort of consider him I don't know. He's in the family tree of the ancient astronaut thing now. And so what's a lot of peculiar things about him. So he was a follower of George Pelly, who was the leader of an American group called the Silver Shirts that were basically allied to the Nazis. They were a U.S. branch, in effect, if not literally so, right wing and pretty nasty stuff. So, and Pelly was his pitch was tied in with this religion of, well, I don't know if it's technically religion, but theosophy that has this cosmology of basically gods. And the bit that George Hunt Williams took from this was basically that star people are people from Venus, with godlike beings. They came in spiritual form and inhabited the apes, and their progeny became humans. They had an influence on our development. It's basically, it's a version of the ancient astronaut story, where the gods come and influence us, and all the things that our civilization is based on their contributions. In some versions of the story, they even gave us, if not bees, the ability to get honey from them and seeds for certain things. Just pretty much we'd still be apes without the godlike aliens.
And all of that is so crazy. And just then you look at just some of this ideology that has come out and distrust the government. And great, we should all ask questions about things. I totally get that. But just some of the things that have taken place as a result of these types of people being embedded in the UFO community, which I think has been quite interesting and alarming over the years. But that's
Yeah, well, see, that's tricky because there was a lot of people interested in UFOs within and without the military. So we can't automatically, Donald Keyhoe had a background in the military. I
Mhm.
don't think he was practicing deceit. And some of the people that he got information from may have been wrong, but were probably given sincere information. And he recruited when he NICAP, by the way, started off as a contactee organization in Washington, D.C. And then they eventually they got Donald Keyhoe, straightened it out, and may have overcorrected and basically kicked out the contactee elements of it and brought in some of the friends that and it was and he also brought some of the people he had contacts with. And they also the NICAP, we were talking about people padding their resumes. NICAP kind of padded their organization by picking people with big titles and saying they were on the board, whether they actually had much connection or not. And there's been continuing debate about whether they were infiltrated or not. So, I'm sort of on the fence about that. I really don't know. And there were rumors about MUFON member Tom Dooley. He was connected with the NSA. And I don't think all of these were bad guys and infiltrators and everything, but there's so much confusion, and there's a lot of paranoia baked into the UFO topic, and it goes back a long way. And one of the first things we were, from the very start, in Donald Keyhoe's article, he basically said the government is hiding stuff, and that became if UFO is a religion, that's one of the core beliefs. You can't be a UFO fan unless you believe that there's a cover up. The government is evil and withholding it.
Right. And that to me is so interesting. I think especially now because you have all these people, disclosure is coming. Just kidding. Disclosure is coming. I mean, it's like this, we've been hearing this for how many decades? I mean, it's just like, it's kind of like that QAnon thing. It's like, okay, the rabbit's going over here, the carrot's over here, and things. And so it's like, which I think is just very fascinating, the whole thing. But I mean, do you think that NICAP, because when you look at the people who did start NICAP and the people that were involved, I mean, there was a pretty heavy involvement of people in the intelligence community. So what do you think about that? And do you think that there would be a need perhaps for the intelligence community to keep track of the UFO community because of some of this whacked out ideology people were embracing? And not only that, perhaps there could be a potential of other governments wanting to come in and take information from the UFO community to learn about different things that the United States was testing. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot of conflicting information. So let's rewind to the beginning. Charles Fort is where a lot of people ought to start. So he collected all this information and published in books around the 1920s about all these weird occurrences, some of which were aerial things in the sky. And, he was challenging science because they couldn't explain all these many things, and there are all sorts of things, with disappearances and things where people had been seen in two places at one time. He didn't really go in for ghosts and that kind of stuff, but he was cataloging this stuff, but he didn't feel forced to explain it. He would discuss it, theorize it some, but he wasn't really shoving an explanation down your throat. And I think he was advocating the pure form of skepticism where you need to ask questions and you just don't accept, what you're told, necessarily at face value. You just, you maybe listen, but you don't believe until you have the facts in hand. So we have to, I think Ford is somebody we kind of need to look to when examining the UFO topic, particularly the evidence, but sometimes also these rumors and conflicting information and stuff. So I think we need to, I'm not convinced that there's a sinister hand from the government in ufology, but there has been an involvement. We can't ignore that. So one of the things they legitimately did was that the part of the contactee message was anti-war, and we should all get along. And at the time, the U.S. military, that sounded like some pinko peace stuff, and so they were monitoring some of these groups to see if there was communist influence in them. So that's part of the reason there. But I don't know. There's an overlap. I mean, so I'm listening to what James Carrion has to say about military deception, and he's gathered a lot of evidence. I think it's all worth looking at. I don't necessarily agree with all of his conclusions, but there's enough there to make you wonder. And so that's a chapter that's not closed in my mind, but it's very interesting.
No, it is really fascinating. And I love, talking to Jack and learning more about that, because I think, you could say that these things are conspiracy theories, but it's not. All of this stuff is documented. This is what we would do if we are really worried about our defense and keeping our country safe and things. Of course, if you've got, I look at the UFO community, you've got people who are, we're going to take a tour and go hang out at Dugway Proving Ground, or we're going to go out to Area 51 and all of this stuff. And it's like, and we're going to take photos and release them all over the internet. And it's like, my God, I mean, maybe there was actually some sort of top secret testing going on, and somebody in that community is, gotten a hold of that. And I think there are lots of, I am glad that the intelligence community would be keeping track of this, that our military would be keeping track of this, because I think that's something that is important. And I know that people think, oh, the UFO, why would anybody infiltrate anybody in the UFO community? But I think there are several reasons why that would be happening. But I don't think it's at that level of, like a complete paranoia where everybody, you have a UFO sighting, and then all of a sudden you've got, the man in black showing up, or you've got all of these things taking place, and you go down that paranoia. As you mentioned, you go down that path, which isn't necessarily healthy, and then you get online, and it's easy to see, like, to have all of this stuff that feeds into that kind of unhealthy behavior. So it's a really strange thing.
Well, it is, and so probably a lot of your viewers have seen the Mirage Man movie, and hopefully you've read the book, and that goes into a lot of these topics about military deception. And so that was one of the first things I read when I was interested in, became re-involved in the topic. Another thing was I came across the work of a researcher that, as it turned out, worked for the NSA, James T. Westwood. And I found an interview at a site with a man that he worked with, Charles. Well, he worked for, Charles Pike was one of them. It was Charles P. Vick was the actual person that wrote the article. Anyway, the Westwood, using military intelligence style information, he looked at the UFO topic. His conclusion was that it was mostly man-made things, and unfortunately, I think he took that as an example, as an answer for everything. But by studying the things that he talked about, it made me think that there was a real possibility that the things that involved the borders of nations, where they were sending, spy missions over and things like that, they were really happy for those to be mistaken for UFOs. Now, he happened to believe that a lot of unmanned craft were responsible for things. So, and now more than ever, that's a possibility. So we have to wonder about that. But but the things, when incidents in Iraq, anything on the border of Russia, some of the things that happened from always been to wonder about whether the Rendlesham event was something. There was a U.S. base that was positioned for, because of its proximity to the Soviets. So, maybe some of the things going on there. So but these international incidents in particular, there's more potential for them to be something terrestrial. And now the civilian events, the problem with those is we usually lack the instrumentation, the radar, and gun camera footage, anything like that. And so many of them are seen from the ground, not from the air. And you remember the reason that Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947 made so much attention. He was a pilot. He was experienced. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he saw wasn't something that was it wasn't conventional aircraft. Unless he was badly mistaken about what he saw. So his sighting had this great credibility, and and I think that's the reason pilot sightings, even today, should be given more attention, because they should have a pretty good idea of. They may be mistaken about something some of the times, but they have their there's the overused phrase trained observers. They have a better chance of identifying something intelligently, the direction it comes from, the speed and everything. And they have, should have some at least radar data to back it up. So I think that's where a lot of attention should still be put. And I would hope that with all the attention UFOs are getting in the media now, they're not really covering many UFO reports except for really bad cell phone pictures and things like that. They need to, I want to see them include these reports, and hopefully we'll get, and we'll probably not get many military reports as they're fresh, but maybe we can get some pilot reports, at least from civilians.
Well, and that would be interesting. And I wonder how much, commercial pilots are actually trained to understand all of the things that could potentially be flying around that are man-made. Because it's like you look at, we lack so much training, and you look at what a pilot goes through, and they're learning how to do A, B, C, and D, but where does it start, or where do we implement training pilots on observing drones and observing other things that could potentially be man-made? I think there's that would be an interesting question. And I don't know, maybe, we should, it would be interesting to reach out to the FAA and find out about that, because in my opinion, you have pilots that are reporting things that might actually be terrestrial. But then again, like you mentioned, they're trained observers when it comes to flying. And so can you think of like a really, really good pilot case that would be top on your list?
Oh boy. Well, I really, so I spent more time on historical cases, and one that's not from a pilot, but from a trained observer, was April 1949 at the White Sands missile base, and they had stuff flying all the times. And one of the things they had was Charles Moore was a professor. He had a team of Navy. I think, I'm not sure if they were Navy men or civilians, but anyway, they were experienced in. He was flying it wasn't a weather balloon, but it was a balloon for observational and to, calibrate instruments and everything else. And he had a I'm not sure, theodolite, I think is how you pronounce it. It's basically sort of a telescope or binoculars at the very least that, measures distance and speed, so he's tracking this balloon that they've launched, and then there's something else flying, and it's this oval shaped thing. And it's famous in a way because it was a drawing of it, an imaginative drawing of it was used on the cover of Kehoe's book, Flying Saucers Are Real. It was it's like if it was a bolide, it came into our atmosphere and bounced back out. That's not something they usually do. But he got a pretty good look at this thing. And the other people, he was looking at it through the lens. The other people saw it, and they had a good observation. And what's important about his sighting was he was later went into the press, at first anonymously and later by name, and he was the first scientific sighting, and it had a lot of credibility. Whereas Kenneth Arnold had been a civilian pilot, there'd been some other aircraft pilots like Captain Nash and people like that along the way. But so all of a sudden, here was a scientist that had seen a UFO too. So that went a long way towards establishing the fact that UFOs were something solid and were being seen. So, I couldn't give you a pilot story, but that was a good verified story. And it's kind of an underrated historical case too. I mean, it's not very dramatic, but it was very influential.
No, and thank you for sharing that. And I want to just ask you, because I've got a question in chat from Chad Cowan, who wants to know, has the phenomenon impacted the religious or theological belief system?
Oh boy, that's a little outside my expertise. I'm wondering if there's anything that I can prove on that. Well, the Catholic Church has commented on extraterrestrials a number of times over the years. They've got an observatory, and I think they're open to the idea. And I think at least 2 popes have made comments that it's not against the teaching of God, and that they would basically welcome into their religion, if they approached them. So now if Pat Robertson probably had a different approach, I don't know. And of course, there's some people that have a completely negative approach from the very beginning. Some people thought this was one of the signs of the coming of the end of the world, or judgment day coming. And other, there's always been beliefs that, some people say that, well, it's just a manifestation of demons. It's a trick by Satan. That's all you're seeing. But as far as an actual change, no, I don't know.
And I think, when you look back at the subject, I mean, that's always been there. I mean, it's just, I think that and I think that's, you can go to a MUFON meeting and hear people talking about the fact that these are angels or demons or different things, and people putting their own belief systems on the subject, which doesn't, in my opinion, necessarily help things. But and even, Chris Bledsoe, who, we again had special moments years back with the Chris Bledsoe thing. And I mean, he believes that what he is seeing is angelic or demonic and things, which is, I don't know what to say about that, but your thoughts on that?
Wow, I think if I were a psychiatrist, one of the things I would ask people about is, what do you think about UFOs? So they have all these sorts of psychological tricks, and they say, well, but you're really talking about your father or whatever. Your general beliefs about the world, I think, affect what you think about UFOs and how you process the information. So I think a lot of people go into the topic with, it's based on their personal experience. Some people, I talked about the Fortean approach. I think that's a lot healthier. A lot of people that are interested in UFOs have read what amounts to propaganda that has caused them to only seek out information that supports that these are aliens, these are spaceships, and they pretty much tune out everything else. And, for example, when we were talking about the Roswell slides, I think that Tom Carey and Donald Schmidt were polluted by the fact that their whole mission is to prove Roswell, because that proves everything else they believe about UFOs, the fundamental belief, the government conspiracy, the aliens, the spaceships, and everything. Well, maybe that's part of what UFOs are, but there's a lot of other things that doesn't solve. I mean, some classic cases have multiple witnesses, and there's this thing like the 1957 Levelland case. Now, Kevin Randall has just written a book re-examining that case. And, I'm not sure what his personal beliefs on that are, but basically it was this big oval ball of, it might have been a ball of light. I don't know if we ever really, no one described it as having hatches and windows like a, you know, a vehicle, but it had these weird, you know, besides the light, it had this apparent electromagnetic effect and was stopping engines, car engines and things like that. So, well, maybe that's like a Fortean event. Maybe that's some, you know, was that something blipping in from another dimension? Is it an energy life form, like something out of a Star Trek show? You know, it doesn't have to be a spaceship, but, you know, there's something genuine there. And, you know, if you're only looking for flying saucers, well, you're going to miss whatever lessons are there in that case.
That is such an interesting case. In fact, I've talked to Barry a lot about that, and he still thinks that is a really exceptional, a very interesting case to look at. So that is interesting. I'll have to look at what Kevin's doing on that case. But and I'm okay. I've got to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that you have focused on, because I was looking at your blog and I'm just like, you do the coolest stuff, and I love your graphics. And I want to just show a graphic here, and then tell me what you think about this, because this made me happy. Women's Club to hear visitor to spaceship.
Oh, so one of the things that I've written about a lot, or there's a series that ufologists at Time Forgot, and there were, and sort of as a subset of that, there were a lot of people that gave lectures, and interestingly, there were a lot of women's lunch clubs and things, and they were frequently inviting speakers for their luncheons and meetings. And this particular group, Understanding Inc., that was led by Don Fry, who was a contactee, and it was kind of a semi-religious group, sort of a saucer group. And you know, many of the chapter leaders and different, they call them units, and it was, and sometimes there were, I guess, units and several units in some of the larger cities, but usually in different cities. And a lot of the chapter leaders were women, not exclusively, but a lot of them were. And they, some of them organized UFO conferences, and I've gone blank on the names now, but some of them played prominent roles. But, you know, they usually didn't write books and didn't become, you know, top tier names. You know, there's only not even a handful. You know, Coral Lorenzen up with the APRO group is probably the best known. But, you know, she's not the only one. But women have always, they've been witnesses. They've been part of investigations. You know, there was usually the guys writing the books and getting themselves on television.
Nothing's changed in that regard, has it? But I loved that, though, because there's the contact movement, and I want to just show this again because this is on your blog, and I love it. It just makes me happy.
Oh yeah. So there's an interaction between religion and UFOs. There were a few preachers that incorporated it into their sermons. Now this guy happened to do it for a long run, but there were others who just, you know, on one-off sermons, you know, and it was, you know, usually, of course, there's a little UFO in there, and then it's all about fire and brimstone and come to the Lord. And
I love that, and I've got to show this too because.
Oh yeah.
This is a great graphic. So explain this for us. I love it.
Oh boy. Okay. So, gosh, I'm gonna have to put my glasses on because I forgotten the man's name now. So that was Miss Velma, and okay, who's the guy? Can you see his name there? Oh yeah, O.L. Jaggers. Okay, they had a television show, and they appeared in this costume, and they it was so elaborate. It is one of the most bizarre things. There's a little bit. I think I've got a video linked to it in the article, but their marriage was public, and oh boy. And then you see there, you want to go to the moon. They even had a prop flying saucer on stage. I mean, it was very theatrical. It was amazing. And apparently this went on for some time in Los Angeles. They were
Wow.
very famous locally, but I don't think they broke out much to the national scene.
Well, I guess being famous locally is good. You know, I mean, that's I clearly I need to get some people around me like that. That's what I need to do to start, dressing like that. But I want to talk a little bit about your latest blog, because this is interesting. And so, UFOs, the long black road.
Oh,
So,
that was a weird one. So the idea for this came to me in a dream. Now I'm not one that has prophecy and everything, but there was like the core idea of it. I said, okay, a lot of times you have some people, some musicians, they wake up with songs. Well, I have a few ideas, and when then you wake up, you say, wait a minute, none of this makes sense. But a little of this did make sense, and so I used the title, and I used the idea behind it. So I wanted to examine, how did and it was a shorter article, but involved a lot of themes that I regularly examine. And it's like, where do these ideas come from? Why do we believe in them? What's the evidence? And it, and of course, the sort of the motto of it was, we need to investigate things for what they are and learn what's to be learned out of them. Don't jam preconceived notions, and to be patient. This is not, it took a long time for meteors to be proven as real. They were considered rumor and myth. So this, UFOs, if they're ever going to be proven as science, is something that may take, it may not be finished in our lifetime. There's no reason to expect that it should be. And even if part of it's solved, I really think there's a lot of pieces to other experiences, the Oz factor, as they call it. And some of these things are, if we can believe what the witnesses are saying, they're more almost like religious visions. And it's something happening on a very personal level. There's a range of experiences. There's actually some weird things seen in the sky that, whatever the source, that are genuine. And so, whoever's got a theory, if there's an answer, it's probably not going to be the one answer for all of this. And I don't, some of it's psychological. We know that. Some of it's exaggeration, some of it's hoaxes and lies, but none of these explanations cover it all.
no, they don't. And I have to ask you because, for me and my path through all of this, I've been obviously the Skinwalker Ranch saga has been very close to my heart, my home, for many reasons. And I've done a lot of research on this. And you look at the people that were involved in Skinwalker Ranch, you look at the Kit Greens, Hal Puthoffs, Jacques Vallée, you look at the cast of characters. What are your thoughts on that, and Bigelow, and what are your thoughts on that group of people? And are they doing the subject any favors? Are they leading us to a path of truth, or is there this just muddying the waters decade after decade?
Oh, oh boy. So I'm gonna have to give you an answer. It's kind of like when you answered about the military influence, and actually it's overlapping because there were military contracts. So one of the things that bothers me the most is that, in probably all your listeners know about Robert Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Science, and that was the core. With that's what led to Skinwalker Ranch, the book being read by Blavatsky, the contact with and the formation of OSAP, later known as ATIP. All that came out of NIDS, which was called Discovery Science, and other people that would look at it, conventional science would say fringe science, because it was life after death, UFOs, some paranormal stuff, that the weird things, that cryptids at Skinwalker Ranch, all these weird things. But and that's how the whole thing got rolling. I mean, this stuff that was straight out of Fate magazine, a package of paranormal things. And then, of course, now when 2017 rolled around and the story was pitched by Leslie Kean in the New York Times, all he mentioned was, the stuff that fit into her agenda of pilots and generals and, officials and, very straight-laced nuts and bolts, and the other stuff wasn't mentioned. And I think that was a job of salesmanship. So I think that was a bit dishonest. And I think, but getting back to the people behind it, it's so interesting. I don't know how much genuine information we have about it. So one of the things that during the OSAP time of around 2008, there was also this Serpo hoax that was going around. And I wasn't involved in ufology at the time. I think I first learned about it from reading Mirage Man and Project Beta, and so had to kind of back up into that and see the players. And, it was just astonishing to see these same people. Rick Doty was in that, but Rick Doty, who is the least trustworthy man in ufology, I think could be said fairly, is friends with Hal Puthoff, and he's associated with Robert Bigelow and Kit Green. And now Bigelow, if he was involved in Serpo or interested in it, I haven't seen documentation on that. But these people, Hal Puthoff and Kit Green, they were interested in the Serpo story, interacting with Doty, and I don't know how much they promoted it, but yeah, I don't know. They're at least guilty as being part of the audience in that and helping, encourage it that way. And so, and we know that stinks, but I just don't know. And there's been theories that Serpo, which was this, it was kind of like the exchange of people at the end of Close Encounters, where they go to the alien planet, some kind of alien exchange program, so that's what that story is supposed to be about. There's been theories that was an idea to test how information is disseminated in the UFO culture. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's plausible, but it seems like there's plenty of other examples to be studied of that, and you wouldn't have to manufacture another one to test that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a firm conclusion about that, but why are all these same people involved and it's not, and there are other ones I didn't mention. This Brandon Fugel had a organization, that was, well, it wasn't actually his. He was also, he's the owner of Skinwalker Ranch now. He was involved. It was, I don't know, I'm missing the guy's name. It was another millionaire that was researching UFOs. Do you remember?
Oh, you know what? Joe Furmich is probably.
Yes, that's the guy. And so the Bigelow type folks were involved in that one too. And was that an unsuccessful to the stars or something? We just don't know. There's just it seems to be these productions, and it's not the only thing they've been interested in, remote viewing and all these other things, some of which seem scientific. And we want to believe ufology is legitimate and scientific, but it's hard to think some of these other things are, if they're trying to channel people after life, and that's what Robert Bigelow is doing now. That's his current interest, is this Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, and Colm Kelleher is involved in that. Leslie Kane is on the board of that. I'm not sure who else, but it's just, some of these things are kind of weird. They sort of have this interest in spiritualism. Is sort of like that was ufology in its infancy before the saucers were added to it. Contact with these Venusians and things like that. So it's a huge cloud. I want some light to clarify these relationships.
Well, and I think that would be wonderful. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. It's certainly something that I've been talking about, because the more I learn and the more I step back and I look at different people and their patterns of behavior over the decades, and the fact that nothing has really ever been gained by any of this, but you just get more I mean, stories that are absolute nonsense. And then it's like, okay, we're not going to go there. We're going to go over here because, obviously the UFO thing didn't get funding, not going the way we want. And so now here we've got life after death studies. But that's something that actually the life after death studies, that's been, that's gone back way back, with Bigelow. And that's been one of his things for quite some time. But it's, what is the end game? And when you look at Hal Puthoff and his group of people, and I mentioned this on many shows because I find this fascinating, but Puthoff, the first batch of funding that he received for SRI was from Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, and that's not a conspiracy, that's a fact. And so why is Mr. MK Ultra providing funding for Hal Puthoff and his group of people? And is there something more nefarious going on with the cover of UFOs at the center?
Yeah, and so sometimes I want to think that maybe there's some plan, but when you read the Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science that discusses his interactions with a lot of these people, some of the things they were interested in and considering as genuine are goofy. And you wonder, like, were they, were these people, at least some of them, gullible and led? And, and from what we hear, Robert Bigelow is sort of a tyrant. And it seems like, why would some of these intelligent people work with him and sometimes apparently be ordered to give him answers that he likes? It's all very puzzling to me. And the military connections are troubling. So the worst thing, the most distasteful thing in the ATIP OSAP story to me was MUFON's contract with Bigelow, which where they gave him access to case information. So some of the typical UFO witness does not want the government knowing who they are and what they've seen in
Right.
UFOs. And yet that was, MUFON was receiving money for it. Whether or not the DOD actually got those people's names and addresses, we don't know, but there was a connection that could have been made. And I think most people would have been horrified at the time. So, and not much has been said about that. It's just, I think it's a pretty shady deal. And in MUFON, well, I don't think anyone's been punished for it or reprimanded, or it just hasn't been recognized properly.
It hasn't. And I know that I've had somebody in chat on the show, Phil Leach. We've talked a little bit about some of the things that took place at MUFON and things. But you look at the John Carpenter affair. You look at the. Obviously Bigelow purchasing the database and doing God knows what with it. And to me, that's been something that is deeply disturbing because you've got people who are very vulnerable. They are experiencing things like you mentioned that would not, they wouldn't want to be putting that out there for everyone. And they're trusting this nonprofit organization to do the right thing with information. And some of the field investigators were actually going as far as to put a person's prescription medications into the database. And, all of these things. And then it's like, oh, here you've got Bigelow buying this data. What was done with that? What was the purpose? Was it because there was some need to analyze data of people that might have a mindset to believe in UFOs, might be maybe mentally vulnerable to things because of past traumas that they've experienced? Is there a need to, like we see with Cambridge Analytica and some of these technology groups, that they can go out and pull data from what we give them on Facebook and social media, and they can learn how to manipulate us and create chaos or create distrust and cause a lot of damage? And so at the end of the day, what was the goal of what Bigelow was trying to do with buying this data? Because in my opinion, knowing him and knowing some of the people involved, this simply wasn't just trying to find a UFO case that was real.
Well, yeah, you make a good point. Now, a billionaire can have whatever eccentricity and pursue any interest on a whim, but the government doesn't operate that way. When they build, I've talked about the secret craft and things like that might be mistaken for UFOs. But if you look at that ones that actually have been, they had a purpose and a function, and usually were operating under a deadline for the production. They had a mission. They weren't just building aerial hot rods to see what they could do. They were usually mission specific. And I've written about one that'll be coming up next month. It was a project called Hell Roar, and it wasn't intended to look like a UFO. It was a something attached to an airplane that would illuminate a battlefield for purposes of photography. Well, from a distance, it looked like this huge glowing fireball, and there were some UFO cases mistaken for that. Now that wasn't. Now they just discovered the effect of it, and then one of the earliest uses of it was in a light show in Detroit, for a fundraising event. So they recognized the effect it could have, but I don't think they ever used it for manipulation and deception. Now, there may have been other things that they did, but getting back to the original thing. So why would the military be involved? Well, they probably have a reason, and maybe the UFO data or the paranormal data, could be used for some sinister purpose, like you suggest. But I bet it's with. I don't think it's purely experimental. I think it would be targeted towards an end, with a goal. So I can't imagine what that is, but if we find one, I think the pieces will, in retrospect, be easy to put together.
And that's the thing. I think the more, like I said, the more I am sitting back and looking at the way, you've got Bigelow and his group of people that are, bringing on, especially like Coast to Coast, bringing on people that are promoting specific things that don't have to do with UFOs, and it is promoting this kind of chaos within people that are in the New Age community, people that don't believe in vaccines, people that are questioning the government and things. And I think there's something much more, in my opinion, sinister with regard to what they're doing. And I really don't believe they're genuine seekers of the truth. And I don't know. I mean, you're okay. Just, like a couple sentences, your take on Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, weird things have been seen, but I think it's one of those that there's so much myths manufactured around it, and it's become I call it a UFO franchise now, and I think there's a lot of exaggeration, and it's sort of self-fulfilling. It's a loop now. It's supposed to be mysterious. You take people and you tell them weird things have happened there, and so it's become a big, it's basically a big haunted house. A creaky board is a ghost. I think that's it, and it's packaged and sold as paranormal.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, like I said, one of these days I'm going to give up on that topic, and that'll be a beautiful day. But at least it'll be a beautiful day for the people involved who don't want me looking at it. But and I want to just mention a comment from Tom in chat room, and he just said that Hal Putoff learned remote viewing from Ron Hubbard as a part of a training team to become an operating thetan.
Tom Mellett.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen him write about that before, and that information seems to check out. So, yeah, I'm not that well versed in Scientology, but I've looked into it a little bit. And L. Ron Hubbard, he came out of science fiction, and it was his goal to create a religion. And they say that the Thetans are actually aliens. That's not the way they package the information, but there's some big science fiction, fantasy, alien, UFO kind of stuff in there.
It's just so interesting. And so I want to talk a little bit. Okay, I want to go back to one of your blogs, which is Contact in Texas, the
Oh
lost
boy.
UFO. Oh boy, the lost UFO photos.
Okay, that was one that I became interested in that. So probably right after I got into the UFO topic again in 2011, and I spent it was bits of it were fascinating. So one of the first things I discovered was that Dr. J. Allen Hynek had become interested in this case. So a Texas man had reported his name was Carol Wayne Watts. He lived in a little area outside of Loco, Texas, which is close to another small, slightly bigger place called Wellington, Texas. And it's close to the border of Oklahoma and the panhandle of Texas.
And I'm just going to show this.
There you go. Yeah. So that right there where the I think where the inn is, or maybe something, no, right above it is the area we're talking about.
Okay.
So Watts claimed that, well, first of all, there was a sighting by a military man who was on his way through the area, and he saw lights behind him. It was kind of like on, a less dramatic version of when you in Close Encounter, where those little UFOs are flying along the road. He saw some lights behind him, two lights that eventually changed into a red color and fly away, but he thought they were chasing he and his family down the road. He reported to the police. The local Air Force Base came and talked to some people, including Carol Wayne Watts, and he said he had seen this big cylinder fly over his farm, at about the same time. And then a week or two later, he calls them again, and with an experience that he saw it in his field. He came up, he knocked on it, the door opened, and he didn't see anyone, but he heard a voice, and they wanted him to come inside and stand in front of a machine for a physical examination. And they came out, they took a report and everything. The thing was, this man, he was 28 years old at the time, married, had at least 2 young children. He was considered a pillar of the community, a churchgoer, just not he had a high school education. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't a dummy. He was at least of average intelligence and well respected in the community. So there was no physical evidence to examine. They wrote the information up and said that it couldn't be explained, and then left. But then a week or so later, he had another encounter, and that's one of the things of these stories that don't, I've told before, like most encounters are simple and brief, but his was one of these series of escalating adventures. And so the next time he saw what we would call a scout ship, a smaller ship, and there were 4. And what's interesting about the beings he reported is they're sort of a stepping stone between what Betty Hill described and what we've come to know as the Greys. They had sort of a white grayish skin. They were about 4 feet tall. They didn't have the huge eyes, but he said they have eyes that were he described them as both kind of cat-like and like a horse's eyes that did kind of wrap around, and they had these slits that went up and down, but as far as facial features, they basically looked like us except in the face. They were hairless. They didn't have much of an ear, a small protrusion with slits for a nose, and a mouth that was just a slit that didn't move, although he did see one smile at one time. And the communication was telepathic. Once again, they invited him on the ship, and this time he wasn't technically abducted, but he was afraid to leave, as the story goes. And so he went in, stood in front of the machine naked to do the head wires come out, laid down gently against his body, and printed out like a computer printout of the results. So he reported this to the Air Force, gave them drawings and description. And it's a pretty involved story. And once again, there was nothing to prove, and his story held up. He somehow, J. Allen Hynek found out about this case and was interested. And what he didn't know was in the weeks in between that and when he contacted him, the same man took a series of photographs, and some of them didn't turn out very well. There were Polaroids, some were in black and white, some were in color, and he had one that captured the head and shoulders of an alien. The others were, there was one that was a more dramatic shot in color of this cylindrical UFO. It was kind of bullet shaped with a slightly pointed end, and it was taken from a couple of different positions. And he had a total of, I think it was 11 photographs. And he had contacted Life magazine in Dallas, and he had met Holland McCombs and given him a detailed account of the story. And this reporter, who had also written for Time magazine, and this wasn't a greenhorn. This guy was middle-aged at the time. He'd actually covered a few UFO stories in the 1940s, and he was interested in the topic, but not a UFO buff. And he found the man to be very convincing. He found the story to be somewhat unbelievable, but here the man came with his wife and children. He came. He had also had the help of an artist to prepare testimonials, character witness. And the other thing he'd done was to gather accounts from all other local people of their sightings. Most of them were just pretty simple things like lights in the sky that might have been anything from an aircraft or who knows. But there was an impressive amount of information. Now, he sent it on to Life magazine, and they didn't run the story. And he was kind of upset about that, because this came really close to the, just a year after the famous story in Michigan that wound up, the Hynek blow up about swamp gas. So the Life magazine wasn't ready to do another UFO story. They rejected it. He got the material back, but he still wanted to present it. And so when Dr. Hynek got involved and heard about the photos, he was very interested, and eventually got Watts to send him a few, and were examined. And there was the problem with analyzing them was there weren't nearby trees or buildings or anything that would give you a solid basis to measure, triangulate for distance and size and all those sort of things, as they'd done in other cases. But the photos themselves seemed, it was a real Polaroid photograph, and they couldn't prove what it was or wasn't. It was kind of, they wanted more information. So they corresponded for a while. And meanwhile, so what wasn't apparent at the time is that his wife, Rosemary Watts, was very supportive of this. She had sent his story to the newspaper, and there are a lot more details of the story. You'll have to read the article to get all of this, but just to kind of move forwards, she seemed to have been a partner in this, and it seems, well, there's every reason to believe it's a hoax, but trying to get what he wanted out of this, he wanted the Condon investigation, the Condon study, to investigate his study, and he wanted an endorsement from Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So when the newspaper found out that he was in touch with him, they started carrying stories, and Hynek didn't really know what else to do at this point. So he said, well, why don't you see if will take a lie detector test? And Watts agreed to it. He took the test. He eagerly took the test, and he failed spectacularly. So after he failed, he said, the artist who had helped him gather this information, he said, well, he hypnotized me and gave me this story. And he also said that the photos came from him. So he blamed everything. He said that his wife, and by the way, I forgot to mention, his cousin was the town police chief. And he was fully supportive of things. He said, no, those people knew nothing of it. So the story fell apart. But then when he got back home, his wife called the media and said, well, what really happened was while he was on the way, two men and a woman flagged him down, and then two men came out and they threatened his life if he didn't fail the lie detector test. So he said that he deliberately failed the test. His story was true after all, although he didn't discuss the role of the artist, and that, you know, it became another Men in Black legend. And so some people hung on to that as like, okay, here's a real guy. He was forced to recant his story, but it was all really true. But the photographs, there were only a few black and white copies that survived. It turns out that one of the color copies were in the archives of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and I discovered one of those and printed that. And, you know, it does look pretty impressive, but it just doesn't prove anything. And he didn't capture it. You know, you've got this cylindrical thing, which might have been a pencil for all we know, suspended on a thread that you couldn't see with the resolution of the Polaroid. So it was a huge embarrassment for Dr. Hynek. He had been involved in a photo hoax case the year before that he thought might have been genuine. And he thought it did a huge damage to ufology. And he said, you know, from now on, everyone will say this is a hoax, because it was all over the papers. So that's I didn't mean to tell the whole long story.
No. But I think this is fascinating. And I want to just say that, you know, I encourage people to go to blueblurrylines.com and look at the wonderful things that you've put in there, and the work that you've done, and the graphics, which I've shown tonight. Thank you for letting me show some of your graphics, because they're just amazing. And you can read more about this, get more details. Along with that, you can look at all the work that you've done in the Cash Landrum case, which I think is absolutely fascinating and disturbing. And you mentioned Rendlesham and how they could, you know, possibly be connected and things. I think that is fascinating. But I've got a question here that Peter from Shadowy Spectrums asked a while ago. What do you think of the abduction phenomenon?
Oh boy. Well, you know, I've largely avoided it. You know, I think it's kind of an unpleasant topic. I think there's no doubt that a lot of it is psychological. In the case of Carol Wayne Watts, you can look at almost every element of his story and say that you know, it's traceable to another UFO story, which is one of the reasons it seems so suspect, other than the fact that it gets bigger with every chapter. You know, he had telepathic contact and all this stuff. So, okay, one interesting thing about, and Professor Lawson, and I'll probably botch this, but I do know that he had conducted this study where he took people who had not had an abduction experience, and he had them asked them to imagine it and describe it, and it was very close to what people describe. So it just very little comes out of it that's beyond what humans can imagine or have experienced, and it's just so repetitious. You know, it seems like in some of this contact with aliens, whether it's abductions or contacts, you would get some genuine knowledge that's, you know, beyond what science has or human experience. And it's mostly just things about brotherhood and things. So, you know, I'm open to the possibility, but I think genuine UFOs, if they're extraterrestrial, I think those cases are very rare. I think rarer still would have to be encounters with the occupants, whether it's, you know, an abduction or anything else. So I think those are, you know, those would probably would not number in the dozens. You know, I think there'd be very few if they're genuine.
And so, how in the world would we know? I mean, that's the thing. It's like you look at when abductions, you know, that whole craze came out, and then you look at the people that have manipulated the abduction, you know, research and things, and some of their approaches that are probably less than ethical, I would imagine. And then you look at other UFO groups who have taken it upon themselves to ask abductees to do these questionnaires. And when you look at some of the questionnaires and you look at some of the questions on them, they're quite interesting. And I have to wonder, again, I have to wonder if this is not just a way to learn how to, I don't know, manipulate people, or to learn what makes people tick. And I don't think, looking at the what I have in my archive here with regard to all of the abduction surveys that have been done over the decades, I mean, what does that have to do with being abducted by aliens? I think it's more of a psychological profile.
Oh boy. So
Oh boy.
Paul Benowitz, he was interested in aliens and alien abductions, and he was afraid of them, literally protected himself with tinfoil from them. And so one of the things Richard Doty said, maybe the only thing he said that actually sounds genuine to me, was that when it came to spreading disinformation, that he didn't have to do much. There just might be a nudge here and there, but there was so much. And I think that's probably true. There's so many people with agendas that they want to believe so many outlandish things that not a lot of phony stuff has to be introduced. And it's repeated so freely, and that's a problem as far, even in the genuine cases, things get repeated and distorted, as well. People love to talk, and when they repeat and reword things, there's shadings, and they bring in their own interpretations. So that's one of the things that I always say. It's like, if you can, go to the original testimony of the witnesses, see what was said, the first version, the primary evidence. And as far as the Cash Lantern case, I've tried to present I've got a section there of documents, a lot of things that, and I put the most, I'm interested in anything the witnesses ever said, but especially the earliest interviews. And so you can see those there. And, I almost don't like to talk about the case, because there's been so much coverage on television and distorted views. It's almost like what most people know is kind of like a fable based on the real events. And there's all these assumptions and kind of myths and barnacles that have been attached to it. And I've done my best to kind of strip that off. And when people ask me questions, it's like, well, that's like, it's like, when they make a book out of the movie, and it's, they keep a few names and change, some of the things are that bad. So, it's like, I would just rather people examine the information for themselves and draw their own conclusion.
But if you were to give us just like a brief rundown on your opinion on what took place with the case, could you do that?
Well, oh boy, it's tough. But
I know, I'm so naughty that way, but
so I thought about it, like, if I made a movie of this, how would I tell the story? And I think I would start the story with Betty Cash being in the hospital. She had had heart surgery before. She was under medication, but whatever was happening to her on at the end of December, she had this skin condition that ultimately led to her hair falling out. And we have some conflicting information as to when her hair fell out. I think that was probably began about 2 weeks after the incident was supposed to have happened, and not that night. Sometimes in the retelling, hair's falling out on her pillow. And so she had her face was swollen, her eyelids were so much so that she couldn't see. She had flu-like symptoms, nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, couldn't eat, so she was weak. Her friend Vicki Landrum took her into her home, cared for her. When she didn't improve, took her to the hospital, and Betty was in the hospital for about 2 weeks. They stabilized her. They tested her. got her well enough that she went home, but the symptoms returned and she came back a few days later. So she was in the hospital for almost a month. And I think the second visit is when they really had the hair loss. And so with some of these symptoms combined with the hair loss, they thought, well, these mirror the symptoms of radiation poisoning. And they tested her blood, but there was no, if it was radiation poisoning, it wasn't like nuclear, atomic radiation, and it would have to have been something like microwave radiation. And if it was nuclear radiation, the onset of symptoms were so immediate, it should have been a lethal dose. And as far as the incident itself, the story of that didn't come out until she was hospitalized a second time, because they had apparently agreed to keep it secret. They were out driving, Betty Cash with her friend Vicki Landrum, on the night of December 29th, as the story goes. They had intended to go play bingo that evening. It was between Christmas and New Year's, and all the places that have it, veterans and associations and churches and everything, were closed because of that period. So they went to a diner instead on the way home, and they'd gone from Dayton, Texas to New Caney, maybe a 40-mile drive away, something like that. And we're driving back on this 2-lane rural highway that has been described as deserted, but there were some things around there. There were a beer joint and some other things. It was not completely abandoned, and it wasn't. By the way, it was only like like 18 miles from the Houston airport. There were also a small town around, but they were on basically a featureless stretch with nothing but pine trees on the side of the road when they saw this bright object, and they came down in front of the road, and they said it was bigger than a water tower. I mean, it was apparently huge, and it was so bright they couldn't describe it. That was the initial description. It was later said to be diamond shaped, but only the little boy, which was the Colby Landrum, who was just short of 7 years old at the time, he was riding along with him. He was at the time, Vicki, it was his grandson, but she had legal custody of him, and she frequently just called him her son. It was his description later. He said that it was diamond shaped. So, but the women themselves, they said it was blinding and couldn't describe it. But so the strange thing about it is it made a mechanical sound. Well, really two. One was this hissing that they described sounding like air brakes, and then there were intermittent beeps that Betty said it felt like it penetrated her skull. So when they saw this object in front of them, they stopped the car. Betty got out to look at it. Vicki was, frightened and screaming, and she and Colby got out very briefly. He was scared. She got back in the car with him and was holding him to protect him. And Betty was outside the car for a few minutes. And the other strange thing about this object was that it intermittently had flames that shot out from the bottom of it. And it would also kind of go up and down slowly, but it's really unclear as to whether, it didn't seem to be like jet-like propulsion. Mm-hmm. So there were all these strange things going on. And they weren't able to really give later when they were interviewed, they weren't able to give a good description. So they gave this information to the hospital. Vicki, Betty was the only one that was hospitalized. Vicki had, apparently Vicki and Colby said they had sunburn-like conditions and flu-like symptoms, but much less severe, and it passed. And Vicki had some hair loss apparently, but nothing as severe as the problems that Betty had. Betty's are well documented. The others are not. Dayton's a small town. Betty talked to her neighbor, who was the chief of police there. It took him a while, but he located a card for reporting, National UFO Reporting Center. That still exists today with Peter Davenport, but it was originated by Robert Gribble, and it had a hotline, and he gave him. He didn't know what else to do, and it had been distributed to law officers for the purpose for UFO reports to be passed on. So that's what he did. Gave it to Vicki Landrum. She called and gave a report, and and I've got at the blog and it put up on YouTube a recording of this call. And Vicki does sound distressed. She doesn't describe things very well, but the message that she's trying to get out is that Betty Cash is sick in the hospital and that she needs help. And the doctors didn't know what was wrong. They tested her blood. They didn't find radiation in it. And, so she put out the plea. Gribble passed it along to APRO, and, there was a foul up. They didn't have anyone in Houston they were in Tucson. They didn't have anyone in Houston to investigate. And later they passed it on to a MUFON, or a MUFON member, John Schuessler in Houston. And it didn't get, so what I'm trying to say is it didn't get investigated immediately. Not only was there a delay in Betty and Vicki reporting it, the UFO investigation kind of got stalled. And it got out in a unusual way. It's kind of a UFO soap opera, but there was a guy called Bill English. He was an APRO member, and he sort of poached the report and sold it to the partner of National Enquirer, the Weekly World News, before they became completely fantastic and made up all their stories. They did actually cover some UFO stories. So they had, they were interested in the story. They got the witnesses to make a tape telling their story. It was sent to them, and it was through the word of that, a local reporter got a hold of the fact that there was a UFO story, interviewed the witnesses, and that local reporter contacted John Schuessler because his organization Vehicle Information System Technology. Anyway, it was mostly people that were NASA related, engineers and such, independent of NASA, but contractors. They and he got in touch with Betty Cash as a result of that, not through the channels that were built to put witnesses in contact with investigators. So it was almost a month later, and what he first did was call Betty, and then it was a week later before he got in touch with Vicki and went to the scene to investigate. So it was sort of a cold case by the time it was investigated. So that's how it started.
And the whole thing is so interesting. And then you've got, like John Alexander coming in and different people and then like explain for everyone listening the timeline between when the Cash Landrum case happened and when Rendlesham happened.
Oh, there were days apart. I think that the date of Rendlesham is the 26th of December, and it might have been at midnight. So it's and the 29th is of December is in the evening is when the Cash Landrum event. So we have just a few days apart. There's some, I think sometimes the similarities are exaggerated, but so one of the things they left out in the story, and there's a lot more parts to it. After they drove away from the incident, they saw military helicopters, and they became convinced that it was escorting or pursuing the event. So that made the witnesses believe that this was either a military project or the military knew about it and could give them some information about what had harmed. That was their position, and eventually what their legal complaint was based on. So in that, the Cash Landrum case involved the military, and of course the Rendlesham was military witnesses, and both involved a UFO, and it was the time was similar. the shape of the objects and the description is pretty dissimilar. Some people kind of made a stretch that, well, a triangle is angular and it's almost like it's almost, I think that's a stretch. So.
Interesting. Well, I mean, that must have been fascinating to go through all of this. And then, I mean, do you think that they were, the Cash Landrum case, do you think that they were genuine in what they felt happened to them at the end of the day?
I think there's at least an 80% chance that they had a genuine experience. But so one of the people they got in touch with, the first person they talked to, I mean, other than Vicky filing the report, was Bill English. And he is a notorious character. He had all these fabulous stories. Vicky says that he had told her Betty would die from the radiation. And so that, gave her some emotional distress. And they were thinking this might be a government UFO project. And the ufologists, of course, thought this was something exotic. And in fact, Bill English thought that the helicopters themselves were a projection of some kind. They were either a projection or they were additional UFOs that were screened in some way. So there was, they were getting a lot of ideas. But now John Schuessler was a lot more responsible. However, he has always been sold on the extraterrestrial hypothesis and leans in that direction so hard, and it colored his investigation. And so I want to say that with the authority that he had, it's been, he worked for a contractor for NASA, McDonnell Douglas. But the average person would say he works for NASA. And that was the impression the witnesses had. And they viewed him as a scientist. And they trusted him very much, too much, in my opinion. So what happened, it's strange about the story, is there's this feedback loop. They would tell their story. They went out to the scene. He would estimate a distance, of 130 feet from the car to where they saw the UFO. They would then take, well, it was 130 feet because John said so. He must be right. And the Colby said it was diamond shaped. John, in trying to homogenize their report, he says it's diamond shaped. So the ladies start describing it as diamond shaped. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of contaminated. So that's why I say you have to look at the very earliest testimony before this loop took into place. But yeah, they let John Schuessler become, he referred to it as rabbi. He gave them advice. He tried to give them help. He made pleas to the media. He was their press agent in effect. And it was, it's just not the way the case should have been run as a scientific investigation. And, while the ladies' identities had already been made public, I think he helped. Well, he went with them on Good Morning America, and That's Incredible, and years later, Unsolved Mysteries. So, and he lectured about him at UFO conferences. I think that, I don't think he intended to, but I think that these women were exploited, and I think the involvement of ufologists in many respects prevented the story from being taken seriously, maybe by authorities. Oh, and later, Richard Doty got involved. He was feeding information to APRO, claiming that it was definitely a secret military project. It had been flown from I don't know if it was Kirtland or Area 51, but somewhere out west. It was it went it was in distress, and the radiation leak is what caused the injuries. And he took just the information that was in the newspapers, spun it into a legend. And since they believed it was a military craft, and then he seeded, later they had a legal case that was ultimately unsuccessful. Peter Gerson, who some of your listeners will know, mm-hmm. He was, he called himself the UFO lawyer. Right. Well, he was in New York and not in Texas, but he did the initial paperwork for the case. Some local lawyers actually appeared in court when it was necessary. He was one of Richard Doty's targets, and he talked about this project. Well, one of them was Snowbird, and there was something else. And in the court papers that was filed, he said, "We want to know information about these projects." So there was direct what am I trying to say? Contamination is the word I'm looking for, by Richard Doty into the legal proceedings. And so, part of the government was, they said, well, we don't have a diamond-shaped craft in our inventory. And so the more this polluted information in the case, they kind of should have stuck to the general things, right? We need to inquire as to, what happened, who might have been involved, and here are the problems that people have. Instead, there's this diamond-shaped UFO and these chasing secret UFO projects that probably are out of Doty's imagination, may have damaged the credibility of the entire case, and part of the reason that it was thrown out and never actually went to trial.
And this is so interesting to me, because as we know, there are cases where there are things people want to cover up, very mundane, covering for friends and different positions of authority and things. And so you get somebody who's coming to you and saying, oh, here's the ET thing. Oh, here's, A, B, C, and D. And then you unknowingly discredit a case that you have that could potentially, give you answers as to why you are dying of cancer or why you've been exposed to radiation. And so just in a brief snippet, who was the first person that approached them?
So when they made the report, it was that was Bill English, okay. And he was doing this on behalf of the tabloid newspaper. That's what he was doing. He encouraged them to make the tape, and so then and since that went nowhere as far as what the results they were hoping for, that's when they reached out again and eventually connected with John Schuessler. So, one thing about, we were talking about abductions earlier, and I want to say in John Schuessler's investigation, this was into, he started investigating in I think it was February 21st, somewhere right around there, 1981. And Betty, shortly after he interviewed her, moved to Alabama because she was to live with her mother and, to take care of her health. But she traveled back and forth periodically. So, her health, it's always been made out as if she was on her deathbed, but she was well enough to travel, periodically. She continued to have problems. Now, and later, a few years later, she had breast cancer and wound up having a mastectomy too, at staggered times. So, she had real health problems that we cannot prove were related to the UFO incident. Okay, so what I was trying to say was, so in July of that year, Betty was back in town for the filming of That's Incredible. And they also did a part in the studio later that Vicky was part of, where she was hypnotized. But she was also hypnotized in July under the care of Dr. R. Leo Sprinkle, and he did it later for television also. But part of what they were fishing for was to see if there had been an abduction and missing memories. So that's none of that surfaced. There were a few details that I think are spurious. That under hypnosis, Vicky mentioned a smell like of lighter fluid, which some people have theorized was, some leakage of a jet propellant or something like that. And then also she said that she saw some blue lights that she did not describe very well. Well, it was John Schuessler's impression that the blue lights were on the UFO itself. And so in the drawing that's the cover of his book on the case, he's put a ring of blue lights that the witnesses never described anywhere else. That only came out under hypnosis. So, and I thought that was, I didn't feel either of those details, they could have been spurious from hypnosis. But at least the positive thing about it, we can say from the witness's standpoint, is the story did not substantially change. They did not come up with an abduction story or any other, there wasn't a fantastic element introduced under hypnosis. The essential story stayed exactly the same.
And so let me just ask you, and I know we've gone over show time, but sometimes I just love talking, and it's great to have you here. So, like the Betty and Barney Hill case, like, what are your brief thoughts about that? And did their story change over time? And what do you think?
I think anyone interested in the case needs to read the Interrupted Journey.
Mm-hmm.
That's Dr. Simon, who hypnotized the Hills, was part of that, and you get his opinion. He did not believe that it was a visual experience. He thought that this was something that was, well, the abduction experience may have been based as a result of some sighting that they saw, which some people even now have suggested was a landmark, an illuminated landmark. But so whether it was a UFO in the sky, they probably saw something. They talked about it later. They had dreams. Betty read UFO books, a Kehoe UFO book. She wrote him. There was these sessions of hypnosis. So I sort of think it snowballed from there. I think it's an interesting case, and I recommend people read the book, make up their own minds. But I'm not supportive of the abduction experience as something that can be scientifically examined.
Well, I think, thank you. And I have to say that I am a big fan of John Fuller. The Interrupted Journey. I mean, he wrote, he's written several books, one about Dugway Proving Ground and the sheep incident and things. And it's very interesting read. So definitely. But, then the star map. I mean, there's so many things with regard to that case. And so, okay, one more thing, because I could just keep going. I love this. Friday night, I'm talking UFOs. Okay, Travis Walton.
Well, yeah. Okay, so watch your shows on that. I found those very interesting. I was not persuaded that the tower was the explanation for the UFO. I've not been convinced by the story. The scenario that I find plausible is that if it is a hoax, and I can't prove that it is, I sort of lean in that direction. The way it seems to have worked to me, it fits part of what's been described is that Travis and it was Mike that was the driver of the car, right? Mm-hmm. The truck. Okay. I think that they would have to be partners in this, where you basically have a captive audience, and the driver is essentially the stage manager that allows the other witnesses to see what they want them to see and take them away when they don't want them to see something. So whereas a magic act on stage, they would rely with misdirection, and there's curtains and even mirrors and things like that. Sometimes, it was the truck that was able to remove them, bring them back to see, well, Travis is gone, and it must be that the UFO took. Now, as far as what the UFO was itself, how that was engineered, I don't know, but I just wouldn't. And a lot of people find Travis a compelling witness, a sincere and likable man. And, even some people who don't believe his story like him as an individual.
He is a nice man.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that he is. And I just, I mean, there's so many things that the more that I've looked into this over the years, and the more, I don't know, inconsistencies I see, and the more, like I've learned, at thanks to the Jaime Maussan thing and several other experiences that I've lived through. I mean, there's definitely a lot of mistakes that I've made by believing specific people or cases, or taking things at face value when I shouldn't have. And I do have to say, at the end of the day, taking everybody at face value. I mean, there are people who insert themselves into the UFO field who say that they are doing things to preserve history, or to, they act like they're very noble about all of this. And I definitely think that we should question everybody when it comes to this subject. We can't take anybody at face value. So
Yeah. Well, so we were talking before about some of the people with criminal records, unsavory behavior, inflating their resumes. There's a certain amount of people that are in this. There's not a lot of fame to be had, but I meant to say fortune, but there is some fame, and some people are really in it. They become a celebrity of sorts. They just look at what it's done for I don't know if any of the Ancient Aliens folks are very wealthy, but that's become an enduring franchise. And you can say almost anything that's unsubstantiated and get an audience there. And, I don't think the ratings are what they once were, but, there's a million or a couple of million people regularly watching that.
Yeah, the whole thing is very interesting. And so I just have to ask you, before we go, because I'm sorry that we've gone over. Well, I'm really not, because this is really fun. But I want to ask you, I know you and I have differing opinions on this, but why somebody would choose to be an anonymous source.
Anonymous source. Okay. Well, let's talk about okay, well, sometimes there are legitimate things in newspapers and in the media where the information they reveal is going to cost them their job. And the journalistic standard that I think, or the way that usually is supposed to work, is that there's the reporter has the identity, they've confirmed it and vetted it, and the editor, and I think usually there's a second editor or a senior person. So, that's kind of the model, so that they're not making up a witness. Now, there have been times where people have made up characters entirely, fooled their editors. There's some famous news stories, like one was about a teenage addict, with this horrible story. And the reporter's research was done at his desk in his imagination. So that's the risk that we run, that things can happen like that. So I'm trying to think if I have used an anonymous source more than one time. I used one, and in the OSAP story relating to documents from MUFON. And in the instance of that, I tried to follow that journalistic model that I told you about. The co-author, Roger Glassell, was privy to that. Some other trusted researchers, and one was Claude Svan from the AFU. And so, and he sort of, he didn't actually edit the piece, he made suggestions, but so he had that information. So I felt comfortable with that. Now, as it's abused, in so many UFO articles and books, there's multiple unnamed sources, and you can't tell if it's genuine at all. Are they referring to the same person 5 times, or and there's just no context? I mean, like so many of the news stories will say something like, "Oh, a senior White House advisor," or something like that. When we're supposed to place trust that they actually know who they are and have the job and the authority and access that is claimed. So I think that should be used very carefully. And there are some researchers that choose to use pseudonyms. Most of the time, their identities are known to colleagues, but they don't want that in the public. And I think under certain circumstances, that's okay. But when you go on Twitter and you're talking to someone that's like, UFO Jesus or Lord Voldemort or something like that, and there's no accountability, there's no body of work to back them up or something like that. I think that's terrible. But like my friend Isaac Coy, he has a body of work that goes back, for 10 or 15 years. And there's a quality of work, a reputation, and he's consistently delivered. And the man through his works. but these anonymous people that and some of them are seem to have agendas. They're cheerleader for or against something, and that seems to be their only purpose to stir up controversy to promote their side.
Well, I think it's interesting because I know that Isaac has done a great deal with regard to, sweeping up collections and getting data, and making sure that collections are preserved and things. And I really admire that about him, and I admire that about Barry Greenwood and other people that are doing that. But my question about hiding behind anonymity, specifically with regard to Isaac Coy, is the fact that Isaac chose to, it's not like he's just putting out a body of work, but he is also defaming other people, and yet he's not willing to put himself forward. And I think if you're willing to do good work and you're on this kind of path, then that's great. But the second you start taking on other people and getting your online trolls to send death threats and different things, I think that becomes a different issue. And to me, you shouldn't be hiding behind anonymity. That's not okay. I mean, we see that, time and time again in the online community. And I think there's a problem with that at the end of the day. So I know what you're saying about Isaac, but I know from my point of view, that was pretty shady. So why should he be allowed to skewer people and send out letters to multiple people in the UFO community that are, discrediting people and not have his real name attached to that? I don't think that's fair. And I can't imagine that you would either.
Well, I understand your position, and I don't know all the pieces of that. And some of the people you described as trolls were, I know who you're talking about, what they said, why they did it, and some of those were definitely out of line. I don't agree with all your characterization of the things. And you said defamed. I don't know if I would agree with that. I don't think that I don't think that being anonymous automatically eliminates you from the ability to debate something. But, I see your position. I don't, I like I say, I'm not sure what you're thinking of when you said defamed. Okay. Well, give me an example. I don't want to make this too contentious, but
no. And I appreciate you. And this is a really important conversation. And I think this is one of the reasons, like over the years, it's like, you and I have gone through our paces, I have really come to like you and respect what you do. And I'm really grateful that you're here and you're sharing your input. And I think for me, I've gone, I was this, like I said at the beginning of the show, I'm this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed person who went through this change, and I believed things that I shouldn't have believed. And I can understand how I would be like, okay, what is this girl doing? She's a, yada. I mean, I get that. I get it. And I'm glad that we're friends and we can talk about this. And but it's interesting to me though, to see how, I don't know, some of this can be used in ways that if we want to really see some sort of reform and we want to see credibility in the subject, that when people launch kind of online campaigns to try to take on other people, I think for me, you should be forthright with your identity. And I think, like I was saying, if you're a historian and you're doing things behind the scenes and you're not trying to influence public opinion, then I think that's great to be anonymous, or to use a pseudonym. But the second you go out there and try to influence public opinion, shouldn't we? I don't know.
Well, okay, I see what you're saying, and Isaac does not wish to be a public figure. I sort of feel uncomfortable speaking for
Oh no,
him,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
but I'll just say this: he has changed his role in recent, well, really probably since 2015, is less. One of the things he used to do is analyze videos and try to expose the fakes. He's really concerned with the genuine information, and seeing that all, particularly these things, these viral UFO videos. Well, he's seemed kind of gotten out of this because he, in doing genuine research, he was being associated as a debunker. Well, Mick West and other people are doing work like that. Scott Brando does UFO interest. He does pretty much the same things on videos, and he's concentrated more on the UFO work, contacting people, getting permission, and sharing it. And that's that's something positive. It's a good role for him, and I think he should continue that. So he's kind of removed himself from the controversies, and it's so maybe he's listened to your side of that, and anyway, the result is the same. He's no longer doing that. So
Yeah.
but are you aware of other figures that I was really speaking more to Twitter. There are also some bloggers. There was one, I think his identity has been known, but he was a To the Stars advocate, this Andreas Freeman Stahl, and he is he's prevalent on Twitter, and he's pretty vicious when he's a campaigner. He calls himself a social influencer, and he has this agenda that it's not balanced. I want there to be research. I want there to be open minds, and but he's sort of like beating the saucers from outer space drum, and is perfectly willing for the military cooperation. It's like the military is a part of things. I hope that they will share information with the public, but their track record is not so good. And I think they should be a partner, not a leader in things.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, now, especially like you mentioned, like with UFO Twitter and social media, I mean, there are so many people who hide behind anonymity, and that's just not fair. I think when people are trying to, especially when you see this online kind of bullying and stuff campaign, it's a bad situation. So I appreciate you letting me put you on the hot seat about that, and I appreciate you answering, because I think it's really important, and that's another thing that I respect about you. So thank you. You're like, sweet baby mama. But we made it through. That was good. That was that was really awesome, and I appreciate that. It's I think for me, like, the whole thing has been like the longest. This has been a long. I look back at everything, and it's like, oh my God, I never had an idea when I got into this that I would have to deal with what I've had to deal with. And I always wanted to be kind and supportive and doing the best that I can to try to promote the subject or promote people involved that I felt were decent. And I've learned a lot of things along the way. And I've also, I feel, been unfairly attacked by people. And, I wonder, and I have to say, it's like, why in the world aren't people doing a lot of stuff on Lou Elizondo? Or why aren't people doing a lot of stuff on, oh my gosh, Linda Moulton Howe? Like, why aren't people really digging into the people that have been promoting fakes over the decades?
Yeah, I understand that. Well, that's one of the, when I talked earlier about UFOs as entertainment, there are so many people that are become sort of celebrity figures, and people follow them rather than factual information. They become fans, and there's excuse me, Luel Zondo in particular has a huge fan following, and as far as the substance that he's delivered, there's almost nothing. It's almost like, well, wait, we're building something, wait and see, and everything. So one of the unfortunate thing of this recent UFO popularity is that very little of it is driven by casework and sightings. We have the Nimitz in a couple of videos. The Nimitz, of course, was 2004, and these other sightings, are this thermal imaging that we don't really know what it's of and the conditions it was filmed, and there's not a lot of direct testimony based on it. So what I'm saying is, most of this is driven on talk and not substantive sightings like we had in the 40s and the 60s and some other times. So, I hope that, regardless of why this started, I hope that researchers will sort of leverage the public interest. The government interest in it helps legitimize it. And so we kind of need to keep this, focus on the positive aspects of this. And there's some money involved. I don't know if it's always the right sources. Harvard is Avi Loeb's Project Galileo is getting funding both from Harvard and private donors. And I hope, some people, there's some mixed bag of people involved with that. But when we were talking about NICAP, it got off to a bad start, and eventually Donald Kehoe was involved, and they had a more scientific based approach. So not everything has a good beginning, but maybe this can be righted somehow. So let's, I want to stay optimistic in that regard. There was another thought that I've completely lost, so let you take it wherever you want to go.
Oh dear. Well, I will say 2.5 hours. This is amazing. So I knew I'd love talking to you. There's so many more things that I could ask you. And like I said, you and I have had an interesting history over the years, but I think I remember the moment that I think I sent you a message and I said, okay, can we talk now? Maybe that was like 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago.
All right. It doesn't seem that long, but yeah.
I know maybe it wasn't, but it was just like, I'm like, okay, let's talk. And you were, let's do it. And I really appreciated that about you.
Yeah. Well, so from the start, I'm not sure exactly when you started, but I had already had negative experiences with MUFON. I was interested in the Cash Lantern case and what they'd investigated, and I knew they had records on it. So I sent the director a message, and he said, "Oh, well, you can find that on Google." And then I got another message. It's like, why are you trying to contact the director of Texas? And I think that was Steve Hudgens, by the way, that gave me kind of a nasty reply about that. Saying, and I contacted Jan Harzen about when he became director, and got another useless reply that. And I said, wait a minute, benefit of humanity, sharing information with the public, you've blown it. I've asked for specific casework. So I was negative on them. You came on and you have to admit you were something of a MUFON cheerleader there for a while, and you put a lot of trust in them, which, and they, I think you feel kind of betrayed by some of them now. So, we've both gone through some changes, and I'm glad that we're talking and communicating and sharing and hopefully working for some of the same goals now.
No, I think we are. And that's one thing, I guess in my whole journey, it's just been like, I remember looking at or reading some of your blogs and reading some people that were more skeptical and just thinking, oh, how dare you, because that's when I was, wearing, here I am, here's my MUFON hat, and you can buy this MUFON bag and yada, yada, yada. And I was so naive. And luckily for me, I started to ask questions pretty early on. And then I was out there publicly enough to get hit time and time again, from people, that were trying to show, I guess, show the world that, I wasn't exactly promoting the truth, and I got that. And I got that behind the scenes. And so I've been trying to, the best I can, put things forward, my own personal experience, and showing people how not to get caught in kind of some of the things that I've been caught in, because it's detrimental to your health. It's not a pretty thing. And so I guess here I am, MUFON t-shirt and all, Jaime Maussan,
Yeah, well, you went through a process, and the thing is that impressed me about you and opened me up to communicating with you again, was I saw that you were making a genuine attempt to learn. You were contacting veteran researchers. You were helping share their work. You're doing archival work. It's not like, you weren't just repeating and reciting and promoting the same old thing that unfortunately so many people do. It looked like you really wanted to get what was genuine and continuing, and do actual research and field work too. So, I'm not a field researcher, and I admire some of the things that you've done. So,
thank you.
You've been on a journey. You've taken some lumps, and so I think you're setting a pretty good example.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot to me. It really does, because some days I just sit here and go, why, dear God, am I doing this? Sometimes I go into my library and just go, UFOs again? Do I really need to to do this? What's the point?
Oh,
But
well, let's talk about that for a second. If all you do is UFOs, it's really not healthy. You get so few satisfying answers. Have some real friends that aren't necessarily in the UFO business. Do some activity. Work a puzzle that you can actually complete. Something that, you read a book, you get to an end. There's a definite conclusion. There's so much in the UFO world goes on and on. So, I think, we have a big difference of opinion and perspective. But if you listen to Nick Redfern, he has a life outside UFOs. And I think that's something that's, definitely needed for your overall health, mental and otherwise.
no, I absolutely agree. And thank you for mentioning that. And Nick is very funny, because it's like, oh, okay, well, it's 7:00 done. Okay, I'm not talking about this, anymore. And I think that's good. Whereas some of us are just like, UFOs morning, noon, and night, and it isn't healthy. And a lot of people's lives have been destroyed because of that. And so I think that is important, to kind of find that connect with your friends, go watch a soccer game, go sip a pint of beer somewhere, or just go watch the sunset, and do all these things that are actually probably at the end of the day more healthy. But I do have to say that I think it's kind of cool. I don't know. I think I love doing what I'm doing. And I think it is really, really interesting to see all of these amazing things, the discoveries, the history. So I don't know. But are
Well,
you happy doing this at the end of the day?
oh, I get frustrated, and I take breaks, and I come back, and sometimes I'm drawn back in towards the casework itself, and I have tons of unfinished projects. So, sometimes it's that, and sometimes I've got a network of friends, and if I quit UFO, I probably have to quit them. So, there's a lot of reason not to ever give it up. So, and to get back to the work that you're doing, I think that you present some interesting discussions. I think you've highlighted some under-recognized people, and I think you deliver regularly quality discussion of the topic. So please keep it up, and I hope that people will. I'm glad that it's on YouTube, so it'd be available for people to watch. From some time to come. Some of these discussions, may be part of UFO history. So I certainly hope so.
Dear God, help us all. but but thank you so much, and I really appreciate you, and I appreciate your friendship, and thank you for letting me talk to you about so many things tonight. You are awesome. And so Blue Blurry Lines is one place where people can go and just read everything that you've done since 2011. And then where else can people find you?
The Saucers That Time Forgot. And Claude Falkstrom is my partner there. So what he does with that is he digs up a lot of newspaper stories, and he goes beyond the headline to tell the story of the people involved, from what happened before and what happened after. Because sometimes there's more to the story, and sometimes there's a full story. So anyway, we try to examine that. So that's a slice of UFO history, particularly the most influential years when the concepts were developed, from 47 to maybe 67, when the whole thing was built. So, but
I love
that's
that.
the Saucers That Time Forgot.
And that's so cool. And I just have to say, Claude Falkstrom with his Paul Hellier Flying Nun video. Nothing gets better than that. That is like the best 30 seconds of my life. So anyway, thank you. Thank you so much, Curt, for being on the show. I appreciate it. And thanks for letting me run. We've, almost 3 hours.
Oh,
I know. But,
well, it was fun.
It was fun. It was fun. So I just want to thank you very much. And I want to thank all of my listeners for getting in here every week. And I want to thank the people that support the show. And if you could do me a favor and just subscribe, you can even go in and become a show supporter on patreon.com. I'm trying to update my website every week, which, me, I've been a slacker as of late. But if you don't mind just supporting the show, getting information out there, I really appreciate all of you. I'm hoping next week will be another good show. I will let you know who that is through the week. But thank you so much, Curt. Thank you, all of you, for being there. And I wouldn't be here without all of you guys. So thank you. Have a good night.